today, I would say some of you know, the biggest pieces of news that we had in the newsletter were about basically everyone jumping into Metaverse. It had to do with Facebook, changing the name and having a good relationship to their stock uptake that week. Nike is now building its Metaverse inside Roblox. Um, I would say that Binance Smart Chain surges to all times high activity, and most of it is driven by blockchain games at the moment. So, do you guys believe that almost every company on planet Earth will have some form of metaverse in their business model?
Me personally, yes. I think that it is part of the evolution of brands as well as of storefronts on the internet. If we can think back to how the internet started and it was just very simple listings of different things for sale, that's kind of what we're seeing currently in the NFT and metaverse synchronisms, I'd like to say, that are basically starting to become in sync. A lot of these NFTs, they have aspirations to be in the metaverse and to be resold. So they'll really be storefronts and they'll really be places where people can meet and exchange just in the virtual world. So I believe that, yes, every brand will have to adopt and evolve into a metaverse format for their storefronts.
I think every company on the planet is going to at least say they have a metaverse play. And a lot of them are probably going to do it badly, just as a lot of companies did the internet badly when it first came out, to Carlos's point. But we're already seeing a lot of companies talking about it. And I think that's going to be a huge marketing term for the coming year.
I think one of the most exciting ones, just to give a reference of something that's real world that's already evolved, is the evolution of digital twins in the metaverse. And what I mean by that, there's been case studies by BMW now that within a metaverse, they've created a complete factory identical to the BMW factory in one of their locations, and they're able to simulate for different efficiencies using what's called a digital twin in the metaverse. So that's part of the omniverse, and it's really exciting to see all of these different things start to evolve. So you can think that we'll actually see simulations of real factories in real time, fully visual, scalable, so you can walk into the actual facility itself that's identical to the physical in the metaverse and ultimately make changes from an engineering standpoint.
And Jason, welcome. Would you like to introduce yourself? You're still muted. Jason was one of our presenters. He's launching Open Therapeutics platform. Hi, Jason.
Hey, Mariana, sorry about that. I had blown away ClubHouse because of that security risk a while ago, and I hadn't uploaded it, so I was in the process of trying to do that. So my apologies for not responding. So my name's Jason Barkley. I've known Mariana for a long time, maybe too long for her, and I'm leading a company called Open Therapeutics, which is designed to take unused intellectual properties around the world and match them up with researchers around the world to have them advanced, mainly for the public good, everything under a Creative Commons 4.0 share alike model, licensing model. And our Therapoid platform rewards researchers who openly collaborate in this open science platform with science coins.
I'm really excited to see this launching, days from now, and can't wait to see the wonderful results from all the hard work over the several years on this. Anne, how are you doing today? You want to introduce yourself?
Hi there, I'm doing great. I'm anonymous and I'm an entertainment technologist working in the space for 30 years. Very excited about NFTs, DeFi, and DAO.
Welcome. So good to see everyone. I feel like this is like a Friendsgiving type of session, both on Zoom and on Clubhouse with all my friends of many, many years and people I work with very closely. So thank you all for showing up. I wish we could share some turkey virtually, but or like some pie. Um, but that said, we all have been working on this idea of metaverse, coming back to what Carlos was talking about, with all the different brands exploring ways and they can function in metaverse. Is it going to be all just from the marketing perspective, or do you see things like product development and other interactions happening in these global Fortune 500 sort of related metaverses?
I personally see, a lot of exploration in digital twins. And if people aren't familiar yet with the term digital twins, you definitely will be. And what digital twins are basically is you can think about it as simulations and recreations, for an example, of the factory that I was mentioning by BMW. Ericsson has also done this as well. They are basically partnering with NVIDIA, and they created a 5G city simulation, which is basically to create more efficiencies um, through creating a metaverse of a factory, you could think of, or a simulation of 5G towers, and ultimately figuring out how to optimize it. So, yes, I see a lot of companies thinking of using strategically to their advantage to find optimization and efficiencies that were not there before. To talk to, earlier, I was really excited, and I've been excited about the open therapeutics for a while now, just because I could see the value to the scientific community. You can kind of think of it similar as that. You'll have a community of just engineers from different companies and different mindsets that will be able to go in and virtually go into these digital twin factories and look at it and say, hey, I can make this better.
I think another area that, speaking of digital twins, along with generative AI, which is the idea that AI spurns multiple versions of things automatically by itself, those two technologies were really critical to getting the COVID vaccine developed as quickly as it did, because they didn't have as much time to go through the different human trials, so they did a lot more work with sort of synthesized humans first, and that allowed them to make it happen a lot faster. I don't know. You could probably speak more about that than me, Jason.
Yeah, I mean, clearly when we look at the way things have been done, uh, I'm a big advocate that we should have this dual model, which is we should have this very long timeline of very careful uh, health risk assessments over the period of time before they're released. But we should also have this very active and robust, compassionate opportunity where people don't have to wait 10 to 12 years for something to get out if they're in dire need of something. And one of the great things about open is that it kind of saddles between those two silos and can provide a conduit between rapid development and distribution to this ability to pull from the very mature, long term way in which pharma is developing important therapeutics.
Do you see a future, for example, for a metaverse of laboratories and biotech crossover there?
Well, I'm not a visionary, so I'm not going to sit here and say that that I see how this is going to be implemented. My guess is that we will at some point see some kind of interaction between, say, three-dimensional renderings of molecules and how those molecules could potentially hit receptor sites, and those kinds of things then would have some potential value in the marketplace. But other than that, I really don't. I don't want to put myself out there to say how I see it going on, Carlos.
I have seen a lot of that in terms of medical training for surgeons, and also, part of the process of robotic surgery. It could arguably be seen as a VR metaverse, a small one, but I think that has been going on for a while now.
Awesome. We got Christian and Eric joining. I just want to let him introduce themselves, and we can continue this discussion.
Yeah, most people know me by now. But yeah, I'm a venture capitalist based in Newport Beach. We've been focused on network technologies for some 20 years and on blockchain specifically for the past decade.
Awesome. Eric?
Hi everyone. I'm CTO of CryptoSpace and a principal in Alluvial Rewards, which is the VOW licensee for the US and Mexico, and founder of New Ocean, a company that extracts home equity for Bitcoin positions, and I'm advisor to a number of different projects. So that's me.
So Eric's project WOW token or coin was presenting today, and you want to just give us a little bit about it, Eric, before, and then we can tie it back to metaverse discussion.
Absolutely. VOW is a liaison between crypto and the real world. It's the first token that is actually sort of, as I like to say, weaved into the fabric of commerce. We had we have a specific way in which we do business that dates back to the times when people were trading potatoes for moccasins. And that structure hasn't changed in all this time. And VOW is the first time that somebody actually changes that structure. Specifically, in any transaction, there's always an ask and a bid that creates a spread in the middle, right? That is often referred to as liquidity, and liquidity is a really big issue in any market. And what VOW does is it provides liquidity by closing the spread, by reducing the spread to zero. So in other words, it makes basically any transaction possible. That's really a financial innovation. It's not a blockchain or a technological innovation, but it is possible really because of the programmability of money and because of the decentralization of systems. One other way that it can be thought of is VOW represents the decentralization of monetary issuance. So there's probably a lot to unpack there, but maybe that's a good start.
Okay, so to translate in English, if you have the WOW app in January, you can walk into a store and you can buy a pair of shoes, and the merchant who's part of the program would give you X percent back, could be 10, 20% back, and they would give it back to you in WOW token. And the WOW economy with this merchant and many other merchants will sort of thrive inside this sort of a commerce environment. Am I saying that correct?
Yes, exactly. There's the cashback programs that large corporations run, and the discount programs and the loyalty points programs, and all of these things are really an attempt to close the spread, right? Because the reality is that the market's ask has fallen. The market's bid has fallen. And so the ask has really to lower in order to meet the bids, or else no transactions happen. So the problem with the existing systems is that when you're selling a pair of Nikes for $100, and now you have to take 90 for them, you in essence have a loss of profit. It hurts the bottom line, right? So if you've been selling them for $100 and now you have to start discounting, that reflects on the balance sheet, right? Your reduced profitability. VOW fixes this because when I walk into Nike, I don't give them $90. I give them $100, and that means that as from a revenue perspective, as far as the accountants are concerned, you actually got $100. And the fact that you issued these 10 V dollars that in essence cost you nothing, those aren't even really reflected in the balance sheet. So the company looks really profitable, and in fact it is, right? But from the customer's perspective, when they receive these 10 V tokens, the question is, well, Okay, that's great. I have these 10 V dollars, but what's a V dollar and what can I do with it, right? Like, can I actually spend it? And if you just leave Nike and walk into Starbucks and you pay for a cup of coffee with your V dollars, you go, okay, so it's money. It looks like money. It smells like money. For all intents and purposes, it's money, right? And so there's a bit of magic in there. That's where blockchain and understanding of sort of token economics comes in, how this value was sort of manufactured, right? But from a functional perspective, that's what it means to both the customer and the store.
Yeah, and I love this because it allows for a true economy to be formed inside this token economy. I.e., there's a reason for these VOW tokens to exist. They solve a problem of friction that exists in almost all reward systems and programs today, globally because of the currency issues, et cetera, et cetera. And they're really attached to real value of products, of services that people are actually consuming.
Yeah, what's kind of interesting is that if you look at it from a legal perspective, these tokens are not securities, right? They're not they're a stable coin, so there's zero expectation of profit. So you can write off the SEC, but also more interestingly, you can write off the Treasury because they're not money either. There's no if you look at Tether, for example, they give you a token and they say there's $1 in a bank account to back as collateral for that token. Well, we have zero collateral, right? We are not money. This is why is this worth $1? Why is this V dollar worth $1? And the answer is simply because someone out there, actually a large growing network of someone's, is willing to accept it at face value. And that really brings us to the whole point about money, that it's really about trust. It's about acceptability. It's about the fact that you don't have to worry what the worth of that thing is. You just hand it to somebody and they'll take it, right? So from a legal perspective, we don't have to worry about the SEC. We don't have to worry about Treasury, which is really interesting. We don't have to worry about the CFTC either, because we're clearly not a commodity. And so the only regulatory issue is the FTC, which handles coupons and discounts and things like that, the Federal Trade Commission, that is. But there we are also very well protected, because any changes in the rules to how businesses discount stuff has really huge effects on the market, right? If they want to change the law, they're going to have to contend with American Airlines and with the hotels and basically everybody. So in some ways, in the toughest environment, which is the United States, for deployment of a cryptocurrency, we actually thrive, right? Everybody else is getting shut down. They're getting sued. They're having to give up money. There's whatever. They're getting the channels closed, and we are just sort of right under the covers, right? We can do what we want to do. They can't even touch us.
Well, I think what's interesting about this is that it has a real business model and a real world application, and it solves a real world problem for a variety of constituencies, i.e., for merchants as well as for the brands that are selling in that particular store, as well as for the consumer who's purchasing the product. It creates an ecosystem that's much easier to use. It adds a lot of utility to all of those parties, and therefore it will be used and it has value attached to it.
There's always value in getting a lower price, right? I mean, from the very beginning, when some guy had 5 potatoes and another guy had a pair of moccasins, the thing was, well, I want 10 potatoes, and the guy's like, no, you get 5, right? So this idea of the the incentives in the transaction, the way it was designed a really long time ago, are antipodal, right? The buyer always wants a lower price, the seller always wants a higher price, and so Valve solves that, right? Now you can both have what you want, and your incentives are now aligned.
You get extra points for making that description have a Thanksgiving theme, Eric.
Hey, Chris, how are you doing? You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, just answer questions. I know some shit about some shit. Ask things about price action or Solana, right? Right now, it's just been so crazy. I saw you guys were running the room a little bit ago, and my hands are full, but I just thought I'd come listen, and hopefully I can sew in something of value along the way.
Awesome. I have some questions that you may want to answer very shortly. So, in the newsletter, we really talk about metaverse. It's the hot topic at the moment, not just for startups. And, having advised a few metaverse type companies over the years, I've been thinking about AR, VR, and just the validity of the business models surrounding these sort of mixed realities, if you'd like. But it seems to me that now everyone is considering it because of what Facebook did and because of Nike jumping in and all the big brands that Carlos talked about at the beginning of the conversation. And we were considering it today in this with this venture that I'm advising that is attached to the Magna anime artists in Japan and trying to create some value out of their art through film, television, games, and all the other media products that can come out of that particular design and graphical artist area of the world. But as I think through, let's say we do a metaverse with anime and graphical arts, it seems to me that that metaverse has to have all the blockchain components that we've been discussing here. And I want to run it by you guys and see what you think. Does it have to have NFT drops? Does it have to have DeFi? Does it have to have all of the blockchain economy now ported over to metaverse in order to compete?
No, but I happen to think they come from the same exact place so that they're well designed to fit together. I think the word metaverse at this point almost has no meaning because every single company overnight became a metaverse company. There's a very funny meme going around right now about that. But to an earlier point about simulations and metaverses, one of the more interesting uses of this, and I'm friends with Don Hopkins, who created SimCity back in the early 90s. And these kinds of simulations have been used to save money and to save lives, for as long as we've had the ability to do a simulation. So just think of being able to simulate a space flight or a airplane flight and how to train pilots before you want to put them at risk. So these things go way, way back. One of the more interesting uses right now, I'm part of the Virtual Being DAO, and the guy who's you can't really say leading because the DAO is not supposed to have a leader, but essentially using digital twins and virtual beings as AI virtual beings who are informed by and or mimic or assist real human beings in real life gives them better data to be able to contribute uh, to essentially the crowdsourcing of information to drive general AI and so artificial general AI. So I think this is one of the more interesting uses. And if you think about it, in essence, that's what Facebook and many other platforms have done in terms of ingesting our data, having us curate our own data, and then selling that data in an unregulated data marketplace. But to put it into an immersive world means we're going to have a lot more information and both spatial and geographic and real life routine information.
But I want Christian to address that because I agree with everything you said, Anne. But I think we can also build in this metaverse a dystopia a lot faster than we could in any other situation.
You said you wanted me to take that?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so then I'll unfortunately have to talk about very boring topics again that have to do with network topology and the reversal of the attention economy. Um, so while everybody is throwing this term around, and we threw the same term back and made some corrections to that in an article lately, we funded some metaverse projects in 2001, and I still have the pains in my bones from those days because I have a $5 million video left that we created from that particular project that I can share, which is kind of funny in hindsight. But the larger topic here is really that we never built the World Wide Web, and that's what we need to build first before we start building augmented or virtual reality. And within that context, we're missing most of the primitives. And I've used that metaphor several times before, so I apologize to everybody who has already heard that, but current network topology looks at human beings in the same way it would look at an IoT device or any other, like a weather station of sorts, where it just observes the data that this individual creates, copies it, distributes it, refactors it, and then makes it available to whatever platform you're engaging with. For whatever the incentives and objectives of this particular platform is. So in order to reverse that, we need to, what people call take control over our own data, but more importantly, we need to assign agency to the user again and make them nodes in the network. But as I mentioned, we still don't have most of the primitives for that. And what I mean by that specifically, so everything that relates to human agency, that gives you rights in meat space, is oftentimes related to things like government issued credentials. And so the point that being, while I'm bringing this up, is we are creating new technologies right now to replace these particular technologies that will then allow you to use the nation state to enforce rights. Because at the end of the day, very little commerce is actually done in the kind of virtual world, because only so many people want to own digitally native assets, but everybody needs to eat and drive a car and have a head over their roof. And so there's very, very limited things that you can actually facilitate purely digital. At the end of the day, if you want to take possession of the car and someone doesn't hand it over and you have to find them, you unfortunately still have to use the enforcement mechanisms of the nation state. Larger point here being as at the moment, governments around the world and the agencies that represent them are starting to issue new types of credentials specifically. So 7 states in the United States are issuing digital driver's licenses. And so the point here being is, as a technologist that is required or needs to onboard users, you need to be able to, unfortunately, yet again, to ingest this particular data, but in a new type of form where you don't create copies yet again, because that's kind of the legacy violations of the current infrastructure, where we didn't create the World Wide Web. What we really created is the large digital landfill. And in order to reverse that, once and if you're onboarding people in a new way that give them rights and assets and meat space, not so much in the metaverse, at that point in time, if you're not able to convey these rights in a fashion that doesn't violate human agency again, we specifically will come after you. What I mean by that, I have a long list of companies that we will simply put out of business because they are the attention brokers, they are the data brokers of the legacy infrastructure. So I don't want to bore you guys with like the details of that, but unfortunately, the vast majority of developers hasn't understood this particular paradigm yet. And then earlier heard yet again this idea that ledgers are an important component or a component at all of blockchain based solutions. That is utter nonsense, right? So if you just read the Bitcoin white paper abstract, you would know that. And actually, the Bitcoin white paper never makes mention of the ledger. The ledger is actually something that we need to quote unquote fix for the most part. Because blockchains at the end of the day are really about handing over control reliably from A to B without creating copies, right? So once you internalize that, then you will actually realize what building blocks are needed to reverse the current topology. End of sermon. You can interrupt me at any given point in time, Ariane. You know, I can go on for an hour on these topics.
Yeah, it's important because as you
Yeah.
start looking at the, metaverse expansion of all this, you really need to come back to the basics. And I've listened to you many times on this topic, and you know, just like with Eric, sometimes I have to like translate it to myself.
Sure.
But the bottom line is, you guys are looking at building a world that's decentralized, and therefore you are sort of still in ownership of your own data in this decentralized world versus giving it over to these centralized servers that are being hacked every day. I get a message.
Right, and
Yeah.
then we need to also obviously create all the primitives that we're using right now that are centralized, decentralized, centralized compute, centralized addresses, and so forth. Right, so most of them don't exist yet or don't exist in a viable fashion, and people are working on that. But before you have that, you can't really move forward, right? So as investors, what we look at is timely development, right? For us, 99% of these things are not investable. Like early on when people raised money for decentralized storage, it was not investable once you understand what primitives you need for these things to be actually implemented and used by developers at large. Because right now, that's the other important thing to understand. The world at large doesn't actually engage with any of these tools. So the real customers right now are mostly the developers of all of these solutions that are being built. And yeah, anyway, so as you know, I can go on these topics forever. It's largely, unfortunately, a misunderstanding of the topology, and that also holds true for almost all quote unquote cryptocurrencies, right? As I've said many times, the number of cryptocurrencies we need is somewhere between 0 and 1.
I think
That's
it's really interesting,
Go ahead.
Mariana, how you actually formulated the question. Um, the idea that we can build a dystopia faster.
Hmm.
Um, I love that concept, and to some extent, we already have done that, right? If you think about the amount of scams that have gone on and the stupidity with which centralized institutions like exchanges have been run so that they've been hacked and everybody loses their money, you hear of loss after loss after loss. That is a dystopia right there, right? And we built it very quickly. So I think we have to be careful with what we build. And Christian is exactly right. We need to go back to basics
Yeah,
and think it through before in our enthusiasm we
yeah.
go building all these structures where everybody falls off the cliff, basically.
Yeah, I mean, Eric is exactly right. So these tools obviously cut both ways, right? So they can either free all of us or end us in dystopia. But the largest point here to really realize is stay away from creating copies of anything, right? There shouldn't be copies of things that you control. So your digital dust should always be under your control. And if someone needs access to that, you stream access to that. So the real cryptographic primitives that we need all have to do with the individual. And so that's the other aspect to that. So everybody probably on this call has one or more form of digital wallet, right? And unfortunately, we're picking all these very useless metaphors because a wallet is really more akin to a browser. You're browsing the blockchain and you have private keys that let you manipulate certain entries on this particular chain. But it's not really wallet. You're not really storing any tokens or coins in there. But the point there being is these are all key lock system. You need to understand the topography here. So that's why I said ultimately the world at large and users at large, your moms out there for everybody on the call, they will never buy Ether, right? They will never buy Tether. They won't have to because at that point in time, if and when and where we exposing these client technologies, so these browsers, if they're integrated into the commercial browsers, at that point in time, they complete all these functions because cryptocurrencies at large, any standardized smart contract, which every token is simply a standardized smart contract, which is something people don't really understand, I believe, is really just a vehicle to move rights from A to B or control over bytes, really. So my point here being is that's why all these discussions about creating new units of accounts is akin to discussing if bytes should have different colors, right? It's utterly irrelevant.
And if I look at all the native chains and layer twos, as they compete with each other, it's all about how quick is this transaction? How quickly can you attach, some sort of a message and content to the monetary transaction? And at the end of the day, it was just basically a reproduction of the same concept many times over. And and then the question is, how is that building, a unified network?
Yeah, I mean, I think even if you look at some of the rudiments, right, the cryptographic basic components that you would need to build systems to replace existing systems. You look at things like identity, right? That's super important. If you get identity wrong, you create a surveillance mechanism. If you get identity right, you get ownership with anonymity, etc. Right? And I think that from a social perspective, we're still on the fence about that. Like I think that there's a good stock of and the origins of blockchain are in anarchy, and so there's a good stock of that kind of thinking, anarcho-capitalism within the space. But at the same time, as the space grows, it brings in all the other people who are of a different mind, and so they look at this like the central banks and their shitcoins. They look at this as surveillance mechanisms, right? So we got to get those fundamentals right, or we can easily end up in a bad dystopia.
And so, as you overlay, so we have these many layer ones and many layer twos, and they're de facto solving the same problem in a better way, more efficient way, right? That's the pitch. And then they built all this kind of layered infrastructure on top of it with all these different protocols, which are really applications on top of the network. Um, at the end of the day, if we now overlay metaverse over, over this, it becomes quite chaotic, to say the least, as we haven't really thought through the infrastructure in a holistic way. So is that a problem?
Uh, I have a question for Christian, actually. Um, what do you think about the proposals at the ITU for top-down internets, the Chinese proposals for top-down internets at the ITU? And I'm fascinated with the idea that we haven't finished building out the World Wide Web and its
Sure.
promises.
Sure. Oh, you're triggering me on so many levels. I don't know if we talked about this, but my doctor thesis that I never defended was actually on number regulation, and I have an actual ITO project right now. So I don't know, that would probably bore the tears out of everybody on this call. But yeah, that's the right network angle. That's why I'm pursuing that, because that's the right addressing format. And there's one number area specifically that gives you rights that are transnational. So what I mean by that, and I don't mean to be cryptic here, but so there, if you have a Sirius phone, as a satellite phone, for example, right? So you can receive phone calls everywhere, right? And also, if you just have a landline, there's agreements between nation states, and in between. The ITU is not a national organization; it's a transnational organization. And so between nation states, there's interconnection agreements. Larger point there being is, so in order for you to be reachable under your local number, all these mechanisms are working together and have been working well together for a few decades. But the point here being is, there is an agreement already in place that gives you that right to be reachable. So meaning, if I'm still living in a small farmhouse in the middle of the Midwest, and no one spent the money to put up an MTBE, so a cell phone tower, and I'm still relying on my landline that's connected to a copper cable, then I still need to be able to be reachable. And so, because the world at large agreed to that, that's actually the case. So the point there being, so this is the ultimate messaging layer. And with all network technology, that they live off network effect. And this is, aside from the US dollar in printed form, the largest network effect that we have. And so once you start there, you have this addressing label. So let's call it your DID in the original context, which is as a dial-in number for yourself. So at that point in time, I can send you a message on that lowest common denominator, and a message can be anything at this point in time, right? So I can send you Bitcoin using a copper phone, just replaying some dial tones essentially. So that's the starting point. And ultimately, and that's another big problem that we see on a daily basis. And as you guys know, I'm working with different standards organization on their boards. Is there's several networks like banking networks and networks around traveler exchange and the telecommunication networks. Unless you're backwards compatible with those and know how data exchange works on those, you have not a snowball's chance in hell to provide a viable solution that will scale, because the large network operators within that space will be unable to adapt your solution. The very simple example I usually make for that, because I've been a board member at the OTA, the Open Travel Association, for a while. We set the data exchange standards for the travel space for the past 20 years. It's an open source standard that people can look up. And if you're unaware that there's certain metadata that's being transferred and that has to be able to be translated into a telex form or an edifact form, at that point in time, your solution, regardless how sophisticated, will not be able to be adapted, right? Anyway, I'm going to stop myself here yet again, because these are all topics I've been talking about for a very long time.
With the layers and layers of problems
Yes.
that you uncovered with us, Christian, over the last year, that are not allowing things that are being hyped at the moment to actually happen.
Yeah.
So as we are here on this call, we're discussing things that, the foundation of the house is not really there, but everybody's building, the living room. The Metaverse reports just came from Grayscale, and literally 6 minutes ago, and they're basically saying metaverse is at the forefront of Web 3.0 internet revolution. It's a set of interconnected, experiential 3D virtual worlds where people
It's embarrassing. Yeah,
right?
it's super embarrassing, because I mean they don't even use the right terminology. I mean, step one is to just learn the language of your discipline, and that's a constant issue in our space, unfortunately. Like you mentioned earlier, and I think that there were people didn't really get that blockchain specifically are not protocols, and people keep saying that. They're not protocols in the narrow technical sense, but people think they're protocols in the narrow technical sense. They're protocols in the business logic sense, right? Which is very different, and it's very important to internalize that if you want to build on top of them, right? Because really the singular use case almost for blockchain-based solutions to build digital vending machines, they should never in any shape or form be integrated with PII, personal identifiable data. You're invalidating the herd immunity of the chain immediately. And we see this on a daily basis. And it's really, really important that people understand, what are the existing data exchange standards and systems that need to be able to integrate with to be adapted? What is the actual problem then that you're solving? And then simply learn the language of your discipline, right? I was listening earlier to some politicians again. They don't understand the difference between blockchain and blockchain technology. Most people in the space don't understand that, right?
Yeah, and it's so interesting because there are things that are being thrown around in press, like on a daily basis, that are pretty much misnomers of what's going on in each direction, in the technology or the business sense, right?
Yeah.
And so people are just going, okay, this XYZ thing just had a huge success, and I'm just going to do something similar to be successful. But you're building, a house of cards in essence, right?
Yeah, I mean, look at the whole stablecoin narrative. So have this interagency report here in front of me that I'm writing a response to right now. Because if you just read the first sentence, you will realize that they have no basic idea what they're talking about. It says stablecoins are digital assets that are designed to maintain a stable value. No, they're not digital assets. That's as a totally oversimplification, obviously, right? Any stablecoin, yet again, is just a standardized smart contract. Right? That's it. It's software. Like to introduce this metaphor of a digital asset, which that is all it is. It's a metaphor. You cannot run a report on that, right? So you just introduced a fairy tale term in order to do a scientific analysis of something. That is ludicrous, right? So, and let alone there aren't any definitions in here, right? So that's the other point. And what Eric said earlier is exactly right. Unless we solve this topic that people call identity, and I keep saying that people call it identity because it doesn't have anything to do with identity. That's actually a different discipline. What we're talking about is addressing the agency attribution layer of network topology. So, what quote unquote rights you have when you engage with this particular technology, because identity requires consciousness, is a different discipline that falls into the realm of probably transhumanism. So, something that Elon Musk is working on. But the larger point here being is so that we need to get this agency attribution thing right this time. And we are definitely on the wrong track right now. And that's why I speak with such urgency, because that's a topic that we've been working on since 2008, when we pointed out that there are no Google users, there is only Google products, and you think you're a Google user. But in 2008, that had very little recognition. To this day has very little recognition, because otherwise, if Congress and others were really aware that Google and Facebook basically makes all of their users non-player characters in their particular game, then they would act differently, right? Because, so for me, these are criminal organizations, right? In my mind, there's no doubt about that. This should not be allowed to happen. The World Wide Web and the internet are commons. So we should all have equal free access to that without being manipulated, but actually to engage with it. It's a tool for cooperation, but it has been turned into a tool for corporations entirely. And a lot of these systems that we're seeing right now, including 99% of what's going on in DeFi, is doubling down on the violations of the past, right? They're doing exactly the same mechanism. They're doing exactly the same thing. And it's
But
really,
even
really
if they have non-player characters, there are real-world consequences to
exactly
individuals based on that manipulation.
100%. Yes. I mean, as soon as you put the character A into the Google search box, you're top of the funnel, right? So whatever rabbit hole you're going down is based on the incentives of that particular platform that you're engaging with, right? It's not based on your objectives. You don't get to set the objectives. And that's not true for any other technology, right? When you get into your car, the car doesn't decide where it takes you, you decide where it takes you. And that's kind of the paradigm shift that we still need to make in our heads. I mean, we keep talking about peer-to-peer solutions, but we are not enacting them, right? So we're creating new types of middlemen that are actually much worse in a way than the legacy systems, because in the legacy systems, I could hold them accountable because I could identify them. But once we abstract this away, but we still allow the same extractive mechanism, we haven't accomplished anything. We made it much, much worse.
And we keep sort of reproducing the same mistakes over and over again with all of these new launches. And it has to do with sort of like this FOMO of like, I got to be in this market. I got to build a DeFi protocol. I got to build an NFTs drop. I got to build a metaverse at the moment. And at the end of the day, no one's like sitting back and going, well, what problem am I really solving? Which is, I like what Eric's doing, because he has told me over the last 3 or 4 years, I'm going to solve this problem on onboarding and on ramping. I'm going to solve this problem of off ramping, and I'm going to create real value economy where people actually buy products and services using this token and it has a meaning to them. I like that he solved the real world problem and not just launched another metaverse company, just to do it. So I think as you try to launch these ventures, and you understand the true meaning of decentralization, and you also understand the true meaning of how challenging the world has become with, Amazons and Googles and Facebooks of the world, and why is it challenging, in terms of ownership of your data, et cetera, and your identity, if you'd like. Then as you try to create these companies, maybe you can create a coordinate system for yourself where you're actually solving a problem and therefore creating a unicorn, and not just doing yet another Me Too type, launch. And that's really the point of our discussions every week, is to point to companies like Jason's company or Eric's company, um, or Chris's company, who are actually, or Ann's company, who are launching things that are solving real world problems. Jason, you want to tell us a little bit about how everyone can participate in your launch?
Yeah, well, thanks for that promo. Uh, we have a pre-registration page at therapoid.net, at Thera, T-H-E-R, Poid, P-O-I-D, .net, and we're offering complimentary science coins through the registration process. So it's not an airdrop, so we don't have any SEC issues here. So uh, one has to come in and opt in to pick those up, and there's no promised equity value to them. Uh, the other thing that we hope people will do is recognize that open science actually is not a new concept. It was championed by Isaac Newton in the 1670s, but with the Bayh-Dole legislation in the late 70s, early 80s, all of a sudden, universities, academic institutions were able to lock their intellectual properties down and license them out, which somebody like Eric will love because the taxpayers already paid for it. Now they have to turn around and pay for the product that comes out of those efforts. But that all said, those of you that are here, hopefully you can be champions along the way of the importance of open science and open access publishing, which makes scientific knowledge freely available to the world. And to that end, we see a lot of misinformation out there in the press. It's amazing how somebody can jump on a social network and create a conspiracy theory, great story, good storyteller. And next thing you know, 40% of the population believes it. And there just is not enough of critical analytical thinking around these things, in part because it's so complex now. In some respects, the technologies that we all deal with are not mainstream. They're very complex for the average users. I've been watching the crypto.com, amazing marketing these guys have done, but their app is so complex that the people that I've pushed to it just give up. They just say, I don't understand any of this. And we see the same thing in the science world where the interactions of molecules with immune system and with biological agents, as viruses or bacteria, is so complex, and the language is so complex that it just takes somebody that has a little bit of a storytelling ability that can weave that story into the consciousness of people. And then this community, we are really bad at engaging those storytellers and showing the errors of them. Most of us just kind of shrug and say, God, I don't have time to deal with that stuff. And then that ignorance of interaction then creates this very deep mistrust for institutions that uh, ordinarily would deal with these things, but they just don't because they feel like, these guys are off the deep end, and we're not going to spend our time. My point is that our platform hopefully will position itself in a way where these kinds of discussions can take place in a very civil way, and the actual evidence can be presented. And we talk about peer-reviewed evidence. Peer-reviewed evidence can be placed into the public domain and allow us to have a public discourse about what the accuracy of the information actually is. So I rambled there, Marianne. I'm sorry about that.
That's
No,
awesome. I'm glad you're along.
Jason.
Good.
Yeah, I just want to say, Jason, I am really annoyed about paying for the development of the drug, then paying for the drug, then paying for the legal fight to get back the rights to the drug, and then probably paying for the patent for the drug. That's pretty annoying to me.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I can see it from both sides, right? I'm living it day to day. So I see the one perspective, which is the tremendous amount of capital investment that goes into the research and development and then the commercialization. As I mentioned earlier, you're talking an average of 12 years, couple $1 billion with a 93% failure rate. We don't live in a society where that's all being supported by the government. That's all being supported by private investment. And so if I'm going to make an investment in something, I want to have an ROI for it. I'm not here to do a charitable multi-billion-dollar investment, which is what the Bill Gates Foundation does or the Wellcome Trust does. But they're very selective then at what they do.
No,
The flip side to this, the flip side to this, the other side to this is, yeah, the public good has already invested in the development, the R&D of it, and even supported it through clinical trials. Now it's successful. Now it's in the marketplace. We're going to pay a significant amount of money in order to make up for the losses that they experience across the other product lines. I I've yet to come up with an equitable solution other than an open science approach and an open access approach. I think this is the only way to balance the needs of the capitalist and the market against the needs of the public.
It's interesting. A while back, I tweeted out this comment, which was, we have the science of storytelling and the storytelling of science. And, both can be corrupted. I'm very interested in your platform, but I'm also interested in the idea that many of the science journals are now owned by hedge funds, and how that becomes corrupted. Whereas with patents, Jeanette, they have a limited life, and it takes a long time to get them, and then you're given a short time to actually execute on them. But I have no problem complaining about the costs of college, and certainly in the U.S., how colleges cost so much more than in other parts of the world. But yeah, it's very interesting to
Well,
analyze
and
it.
and there is a hegemony, right? There's a monopoly of peer-reviewed journals. Elsevier is the elephant in the room, right? Their margins are amongst the best of any company in the world. They're amazing. And they've created a business model whereby I write a journal article. I need to have it published in Elsevier in order to get promotion in my institution. And so they've created a brand whereby they become the magnet of which I need to publish in, and then they turn around and sell that access even back to me, the original author. And so that entire paradigm of scientific publishing is really, really, really a big problem for the distribution of knowledge, particularly to the economically developing areas of the world in, say, Africa, Asia, and Latin America. So those scientific communities don't have the money to pick up multiple subscription agreements across multiple lines, and you have to have an interdisciplinary approach today. So it's not just one journal fits all. You have to have a number of journals, and these subscription agreements are out of sight. So
Yeah,
now along comes this new paradigm called open access, which on the surface sounds great. Oh, we're going to make sure that all this knowledge is distributed around the world for free. But those organizations have to be sustainable. And so they have to charge the authors something called an APC, an article processing charge, so that that particular article can be platformed, can be peer reviewed, so it can be distributed. They have to pay for all of that infrastructure. And so that falls back to the original researcher. So if I'm living in Ethiopia and I've done some really good work and I think it should be published, well, I'm not going to get it published in Elsevier most likely because, well, I'm in Ethiopia. So I'm not going to get very much attention. So I'm going to turn to an open access journal. But man, it's $1,500 to $3,000 for me to pay to put into that journal article and make it freely available to the rest of the world. So there's this really complex and difficult paradigm that people just think this information should be freely available and made available to everybody in the world, but there's an infrastructure that has to be supported for that. One of the great things about Therapoid is that ours is actually made freely available to the scientific community so they can come in, upload on the preprint server, and freely distribute to the world. And the peer review comes out of the actual scientific community. So we only have to pay for the infrastructure of that review process. Well, we're revenue generating, and so the revenues allow us to be sustainable to enable those underserved, economically challenged researchers to distribute their knowledge across the planet. So I've said a lot there in the
Yeah,
connection side, but
I
that's,
wish we can continue on forever, but we're 6 minutes over time. So
oh,
thank you
sorry,
guys.
Mariana.
Great conversation. Welcome back, Jason. And congratulations on the launch. Congratulations on the success of your token, Eric. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Christian, Carlos, Jeanette, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Come back. We will be discussing Ask Us Anything about NFTs, DeFi, and DAOs on Tuesday. So if you have any questions, please bring them back to our room next week. And we will be here next Wednesday talking a little bit more about what creates a really great business venture and how to think about creating one so you're not overlooking these major issues that our panel was pointing to today. So thanks everyone. Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy
See you next
Thanksgiving.
week.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks for
Thank you.
attending.